And the purpose of today's session is to explore how you can be more sustainable in your current workplace and inspire positive change in your employees. And for this session, we're joined by none other than Joseph Gelfer, Senior Manager of Research and Insights at Kite Insights. For those who've just joined, I'm Finley Johnson of Mobility Ways. But the special guest today is Joseph. And really, Joseph's going to be investigating the question, do people need to change their jobs in order to have a green job? And this question comes from some findings of some of Kite Insights research. So 8 out of 10 employees are ready and willing to take action on climate change in their roles. But many assume that they have to work in the sustainability function to do so. Is that the case? Well, we'll find out shortly. We're aiming to finish up around 12 o'clock, and the format of today's session will be a presentation from Joseph, which will last about 20 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session to follow. So a bit of housekeeping. At the bottom of your screens, you will see a chat box, and we invite you to say hello, introduce yourselves, add your LinkedIn for some of our other participants. But the chat box is for general comments. If you do have questions throughout and you would like to put those to Joseph in our Q&A, then please do use the question and answer box specifically. Now, moving over then, so Kite Insights, Joseph again from Kite Insights. Kite Insights helps businesses respond to climate and sustainability issues by empowering organizations and their workforce with clarity and confidence to play their part in sustainable transformation. Now, in addition to his work, Joseph is also a passionate Greens jobs advocate. So he convenes the Work and Careers Group at Climate Coaching Alliance and established Ecotopian Careers, which offers online courses and career coaching to help people transition into green jobs. However, in a previous life, Joseph was a masculinity researcher, and apart from traditional academic work, some of your ideas, I believe, were put into practice to market and sell deodorant and beer and recruit men into the Australian Army. So there's bodies of research that suggest that women have long surpassed men in the area of environmental action. So I'd be quite interested in understanding your take on that, Joseph, but that's a conversation for another time, of course, because today Joseph's going to be talking to us about your job, and every job is a climate job. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Finlay. Yeah, I mean, actually, that connection between gender and climate and sustainability is absolutely fascinating. Maybe that is another webinar one day. I would absolutely be delighted to get into it to close that circle. Excellent. So, welcome everyone. My name is Joseph Gelfer. As I've been introduced, I'm part of the Research and Insights team at Kite Insights. What I'm going to do today, I guess, is maybe like 3 parts. First of all, I just want to give you a little bit of background as to kind of how I came to this space. And there may well be elements of that story that resonate with some of you who are here today, because I'm not historically a sustainability person. Like many people, well, I'm going to say most people in the sustainability space in 2024 are actually relatively new to the sustainability space, and I'm no different. So start off giving you a little bit of background. Then I'm going to move into this report that Kite Insights has produced of every job is a climate job, which will give you a little bit of a statistical foundation to how employees are thinking about climate and sustainability issues at work in general, which will hopefully give you a little bit of kind of ambient awareness and confidence, I think, and validation about what might be able to be achieved within the organizations that you work in. Then on part 3, I just want to talk a little bit about the nature of green jobs, how they're kind of whether or not they're in ascendancy or descendancy at the moment, where they're likely to go, and then we'll jump into a bit of a Q&A. So maybe if I could just get onto the next slide. So for a little bit of historical context, so maybe like if we were speaking a decade ago, I was not a sustainability person in any shape or form. Indeed, I was teaching communication studies in a university in France. I'd always been interested in climate and the environment, but I wasn't a scientist. I wasn't a sustainability specialist, and always assumed that someone else was going to sort it all out. As you know, that never happened. So I was starting to get more and more, more compelled, I think, to try and be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So I'm teaching in the university. I've got all of these hundreds and hundreds of young minds at my disposal every year. So I started really talking up climate to young people. And the way that I would often do this is to kind of highlight this quite unique confluence of three events. And the first is that, working on sustainability and climate is the morally right thing to do. The second is that it is, the interesting, creative, and innovative thing to do. And the third, if you play your cards correctly, it's the lucrative thing to do. I literally cannot think of any time in human history where these three things have come together in such a golden opportunity. So I'm kind of talking about this to students. I'm saying, look, you've got to get into climate mega trend of the century for these three reasons in particular. And then after I'd been doing that for a few years and having the same conversation with my own teenage children, I kind of figured, well, why aren't I getting into climate? I've still got years and years of working life ahead of me. Why aren't I doing this as well? So I started looking around and realized that, at that point, it's quite hard to make a transition into climate, sustainability, green space, however you want to describe it, once you've already settled into a career. And like many initiatives, I kind of came up to the idea we need more resources, more support to help people make this type of green transition in their working lives. So I established Ecotopian Careers really to provide the type of resource that I wanted to exist, but which didn't really. So it was part information curation and aggregation, bringing resources together, part career coaching, both in person and an online course. And whilst I was engaging with the various materials around that process, I kind of stumbled into Kite Insights, who had just published the Every Job is a Climate Job report that we're going to look at today. And it resonated really strongly with the experiences that I'd had and a very crucial transition. And this transition is what we're here to talk about today. So my initial take on green jobs was that I needed to help people change their job. So go from being a communications person in finance to being a working in a green job sector. And at the beginning of the process of Ecotopian Careers, I started talking to various people about advice that they could give, businesses within the sector. And I spoke to Project Drawdown, who some of you might be aware of. And Project Drawdown are a non-profit organization that champions different climate solutions. And I asked Project Drawdown, what can people do to get into this space? What can they do to change their job to a green job? And they said, don't change jobs, make your current job green. So don't get a green job, make your current job green. And that really started a whole different way of thinking about this for me. And it's not just a shift that's happening for me, it's a shift that's happening all over the place. So right now, one of the big shifts in this space is a decrease in talking about green jobs and an increase in talking about greening jobs. And what that means are just regular jobs, which from the outside don't really look like green jobs. So, it's not a solar panel installer or a sustainability reporting specialist or something like that, but jobs which have at least one green element in them. And this phrase has really been championed largely by LinkedIn and their Global Green Skills Report, which is published every year and which is really the main document for data for most of the reporting that you read in the media. So this is the direction of travel right now. The direction of travel is not talking up getting people into green jobs, but empowering people to green their current job. So this is exactly where we are right now. So if we could go through to the next slide, what we're going to do is have a look at some of the high-level findings from the Every Job is a Climate Job report, just so that you can get a sense of how people are feeling right now, and which will enable you to figure out, is that direction of travel towards greening jobs appropriate? Just to bring the conclusion up to the front, it is. So this report, as we can see, reasonably global in nature, 10 different countries from 15 different industries, thousands of people responding into it. So it's a reasonably good sample for the different type of people that might be thinking about this. So we can go forward to the next slide. So the real headline figure, this report got a huge amount of media attention when it was released. And this 83% figure, I think, caught a lot of people by surprise. So 83% of people really support climate action. So that's not just a majority, that is a really significant majority. Most people want to take action at work. If we go on to the next slide. And we can see that people, they're motivated to do it. They want to be part of their organization's sustainability goals, as we can see here. And the reason for that is that not only do they want to support those goals for external reasons, but for their personal reasons, because they're worried about climate and sustainability issues. And if they can be part of the solution, it just makes them feel better. It improves the level of well-being. And anybody who runs a business and is hiring people knows that by centralizing people's well-being, you're going to have a happier workforce. They're going to be more productive. You will have easier talent retention and issues. It's just going to make life better all around. Next slide, please. Now, here we start getting into the challenges. Despite the fact that there is this really good will, remember that 83% of people wanting to take action, there is a disconnect between people's wishes to be part of the solution and their feeling of ability that they can actually be so. And that kind of depends largely on the seniority of people. So we can see here, if you are a senior level of people within an organization, tend to believe that they are in a better position to respond to climate and sustainability activities. And it kind of generally flips the lower down in levels of seniority that you get. Now, of course, in a pyramid of people's employees, the majority of people are mid and junior level employees. That means actually that the majority of your employees don't feel particularly well equipped and empowered and enabled to act in the way that they wish. So there's that disconnect between wish and practice. Next slide, please. And that causes problems. It causes not only does it mean that you're probably going to have challenges acting and operationalizing the sustainability agenda that you've created, but it means you've got people in the workforce that are not feeling particularly enthusiastic about their abilities to be part of the sustainability transformation of an organization. Employees want that transformation, number one, but more importantly, they want to be part of that sustainability transformation. And it's just disappointing to them when they can't. Next slide, please. So we've already seen 70% of people in total. So we looked at some numbers from kind of seniority level before. In total, 70% of people feeling unconfident or uninformed about their ability to act on climate at work. So that's a problem. So we start with some good news. When we start drilling down, we get into some bad news. Next slide, please. We just move on to the next slide. Excellent. Thanks. Now, again, people want to do things. They want training. 70% of people are interested in relating to climate action training at work. This is a bit of a challenging space for people because obviously, as we're going to talk a little bit about, I'd imagine in a Q&A, different people need different trainings for their roles. There are kind of top level trainings that you can provide to employees that are about climate. But information that's about climate is not necessarily the same thing as skills that can be employed within a particular function within an organization. But nevertheless, people want that training, 70% of people. Next slide, please. And they do that because they want to be part of a solution, but they often really not only do they not have the skills to act, but they don't necessarily understand the plans and ambitions of the sustainability agenda. So we've also got a bit of a communication problem between all of the good work that is often done within a business or an organization and how that is distributed across an organization so that people can feel part of the story. Next slide, please. So, their own role in meeting those commitments. 38% of employees from large companies claim to have the necessary understanding of key aspects of climate change. I guess, I mean, how you feel about that? I mean, is 38% a good number or a bad number? Different industries have different benchmarks for engagement and levels of knowledge. There are various services and tools out there that you can kind of get a sense of how you benchmark against other people in your industry. I think we can do better. I think in an ideal world with the mega trend of the century, we can do better than these types of numbers. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is we got this little bit of a sense. So just to kind of recap, most people, 83% of people, the significant majority of people want to take action on climate at work, but most people don't really have the ability to do so. So that's our kind of summary of people's feelings. Now that is unfortunate, not only in itself, but because of the types of findings that we're reading from other sources. For example, if you looked at the LinkedIn Green Skills report that I mentioned earlier on, the headline figure in that report, which has kind of been pretty much the same for the past kind of 3 or 4 years, is that the requirements for green and sustainability skills within the workforce are increasing every year. I think, like sustainability manager was one of the most increased used job titles in job adverts or something like this. So it's really bullish expectations on the need for that type of skill within the workplace. But people, in organizations, businesses, they can't get the people that they need. And then at the same time, you've got this huge number of people who want to get into that space but can't get in it. So we know that the jobs are there. We know that businesses are having a hard time to fill them. We know there are people who want to fill them, but we still got this gap between the two. And it's closing that gap, which should intuitively be quite an easy gap to fill, right? Because it's just like supply and demand. But it's not quite there. And it's not there for a couple of reasons. One of which is that businesses and organizations aren't really doing the best job of enabling their employees, which we can talk about a bit later. The other is they don't do a great job in allowing people the opportunity to transfer skills. And there was another interesting report that was done. I think this was by Green Biz last year. And they looked, for example, at the top 10 skills that were required by a sustainability manager, which we use as a loose proxy for green jobs. And out of those top 10 skills, only two of them actually had something to do with sustainability. All of the others were kind of quite transversal skills. So it was like data analysis, project management, communication skills, stakeholder engagement, all that kind of useful stuff. So like 80% of the roles of the sustainability manager can be found in other jobs. The other 20% can presumably be taught by motivated people. But still, people aren't given the opportunity to transfer those skills across. So we've got a problem there. The other problem that we've got right now, and this was revealed in the PwC Green Jobs Barometer that was published earlier this year, is that it is a little bit of a rocky time for green jobs and sustainability jobs. While the overall trajectory for these jobs is up, as the LinkedIn Green Skills report really shows, I guess that we kind of go above and below that line depending on kind of economic situations. So like 2 years ago, we were quite bullish and we're above that trend line. Right now, we're just below it. So for example, that PwC report shows that I think it was something like there are 22% fewer green jobs advertised this year compared to the year before. But there were 29% fewer jobs all over. So what that means is that we're in a slightly rocky period of jobs, but those green jobs are a little bit more resilient to market volatility than the overall labor market. So there's complexities. You've got complexities that are kind of systemic and which we can improve and do better on. And we've got problems which are really just external and that we just have to ride out. But I would really want to reiterate, despite the fact that we're in a little bit of a dip below the trend line at the moment in terms of green jobs, the overall trajectory is most certainly on the up. So I think what both these things do is point to the need and value of those greening jobs. So I'm kind of been moving backwards and forwards between this phrase green jobs and greening jobs. And this is confusing and it happens a lot in all discussion. Green jobs, things that are explicitly green jobs, like solar panel installers, the sustainability reporters. Greening jobs, any job where there can be an individual sustainability element to it. That is where the future is going to be. And I think maybe we've kind of like got a canary in the coal mine example of this with the way that the sustainability function typically works in many businesses. So, like in the United States, for example, right now, on average, sustainability teams in big businesses, paradoxically, it sounds like it's paradoxical, are getting smaller. That's not because the sustainability function is getting smaller, but rather it's getting distributed across the whole of the organization. So you kind of get a sustainability function everywhere rather than some little siloed group of people. I think exactly the same thing's going to happen with the green skills. Instead of having, a discrete group of people who have green skills, everybody's going to have green skills. And I think probably the great analogy of this would be digital skills. So like 30 years ago, there used to be a dedicated IT guy who could connect you to the printer and do some really basic stuff, and many people had no digital skills at all. Today, everyone's got digital skills. If you turned up to any organization and didn't have basic digital literacy, people would think you were insane. And I think exactly the same thing is going to happen with the sustainability skills, where everybody ends up having this kind of basic sustainability literacy. And indeed, that's been called out in one of the articles of the Paris Agreement that we've got to increase that type of climate literacy and sustainability literacy, not just among professionals, but among all citizens as a whole. That might be a great place for us to stop and head into some questions.
Brilliant. Joseph, thank you ever so much for that. Apologies, I was having trouble finding my unmute button there, but we got there. So, brilliant presentation. Thanks ever so much. So we have had a few questions come in. I'm going to ask one or two of my own, but just as a reminder for everybody here today, we do have the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you've got any questions for Joseph about green jobs, making your job greener, about helping workforce to embed that into their roles, and please do add those into the Q&A box. And we've got just a little over 30 minutes left, and we will make sure that we put those to Joseph today. So really interesting presentation. And so, I mean, it's really quite fascinating, isn't it? 8 out of 10 of us feel that we were ready and willing to take action on climate change in our jobs, and almost half of the work population are ready to become pioneers of climate action within our teams and functions. But again, fewer than half felt able to take action. So I thought it was quite interesting. You talked about the analogy there with digital skills, but of course, that's been made possible with technology changes. So actually, how do you see this playing out with sustainability? Are we looking for external influences, or are there things that people can be doing now, such as with carbon literacy?
Okay, super complex. First thing that I would like to do is actually just, because I have an academic background, we start with definitions and language, right? I don't actually like the phrase climate, and I'm not particularly keen on the phrase of sustainability either. And language matters. And let me explain why. One of the things that we're starting to realize is that the phrase climate and green issues to a certain degree can be quite triggering to people who are not really into it. It's great if you're already turned on to the climate space, that language feels quite intuitive. But for some people, it feels a little bit too political, as does climate action at work. So I think the first thing that we need to do, if we're really serious on kind of democratizing and socializing these issues, is to make sure that we get language right that really lands with the largest number of people. And one of the things that we're starting to learn in the past few years with new studies is the different types of language that work for people with different political orientations. For example, if you look at the difference between conservatives and progressives, progressives like the word climate, conservatives like the word environmental protection. So I think it's quite important that if we want to expand the whole conversation and really scale action, that first of all, we actually start speaking in ways that people feel comfortable with. So in general now, and this is maybe like a little dirty secret that's happening in the climate space, is that people are in the climate space are starting to pivot away from climate. They're understanding that it doesn't work. I mean, if you look at issues of concern for groups of people, in most groups, climate is not up there. But things like social and economic issues are up there. So do you want to start trying to bring these things together? And the best way of doing it is something like the just transition. Lots of businesses are talking about this. It's starting to be talked about at COP, that the just transition of how do we make sure that climate action takes place in a way that is fair, economically fair to all people, so that we can, help people with the cost of decarbonisation. And when you start doing that, suddenly your problems like protesters against a ULEZ scheme or Belgian farmers protesting in the streets, that stuff goes away because it's no longer financially punitive for them to be able to do that kind of stuff. So first of all, things like just transition, which bring together social and economic concerns with climate. And the other is nature. Last month, you might have seen in the news the Restore Nature Now march that took place in London, which I attended, and maybe some other people did here. That was orders of magnitude bigger than any climate march I had ever seen. So the issue of nature and regeneration and environmental protection are far more popular with people of different types of groups than climate is. So the first step, I think, is really about just broadening the way that we talk about this so that it actually appeals to more people and resonates with their intuitive concerns. And I think sometimes for us sustainability people, we try and bring people into line with our concerns rather than getting into line with their concerns.
So, I mean, because of course we're talking about sustainability departments here, and it's interesting what you were talking about the trends in the States within some industries where sustainability is kind of being taken away from a central function and being spread wider across the organization. So do organizations need to be leading this, kind of embedding sustainability practices at their core and communicating that to staff and then encouraging them to want to do more in their roles? Or can this go the other way? Can staff force organizations to do more? Because presumably, if there are 15% of people, I think you mentioned there, are looking to move away from their role into something more sustainable, and there are retention issues here, surely there are threats to businesses that.
Yep. So I think I want to unpack this into two parts. The first part is really about businesses' role in championing the sustainability agenda in society as a whole and the responsibilities that they have. And then there's this other conversation about the dynamics of the sustainability agenda within a business. So if we take the first one, most people 10 years ago would probably have argued that it is the responsibility of government to champion the sustainability agenda in society. That is not the case today. If you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer that was published in January of this year, it shows that trust in government and even NGOs, let alone the media, which no one thinks about as trust at all, is really surprisingly low. And there is a surprisingly large amount of trust in business and brands to champion this agenda. But even if we take that kind of public trust element out of the equation, I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that the governments are not doing enough. Businesses actually impact people's lives in probably more meaningful ways. They have reach, brand awareness that governments don't have. So I think really businesses probably today have the best opportunity of moving the needle on sustainability. That's certainly where I'm putting my confidence. So if businesses feel are questioning what kind of role they have to play in championing sustainability, it's not an add-on. In my mind, it's actually the key driver in society. And I'm not talking that up just because that's what I do. That's genuinely what I believe. But then if you look over to this second part of the equation about the dynamic within businesses, okay, so there's like a top down and a bottom up version of the story here. So businesses will typically think on a top down frame. So, okay, we've got our workforce. We know that we've got a sustainability function where we need to build capacity, and we're going to do that by supporting the workforce. We'll get in an online course, or we'll send somebody out of the building to a sustainability reporting course or something like that, and they control it from the top, and which is very commendable. And I would encourage every business to take exactly that initiative. But it's not the only part of the story. So the bottom up version of this, I think, is equally important. And so then what typically happens is that you get employees within an organization who, for one reason or another, are not particularly happy with the sustainability agenda that they're seeing in their workplace. They start getting together. They create a little green team. They start lobbying the line management. They start, as in with some big organizations, but I won't get into naming names, they might send open letters to to the CEO of the business and say, look, this is not good enough. We need to take further action. And then there are some businesses that kind of want to take action, but they're not really sure how it's going to land. And then when they start hearing those types of desires from the workforce, they take it as a mandate for action, which is fantastic. And I heard some particular examples of that. Again, I won't get into names, but some really quite big brands during London Climate Action Week recently, where exactly those stories were being told. Businesses that were kind of unsure whether or not the sustainability agenda was going to fly. Well, importantly, first of all, they were listening to the workforce, and then they heard the message that this was wanted, and they used that as the trigger. Okay, and it was off, which is wonderful. So I think it's a complex interaction between top down and bottom up issues. And again, and the point there is that it's an everybody issue. It's unlikely that either on its own, the top-down or bottom-up approach is going to succeed at the type of scale that people find satisfying. But in combination, I think it does have a very good chance of succeeding because, this is an everybody issue. It's not, the chief sustainability officer issue. It's not the responsibility of the sustainability team. It's a mindset. It's an emotional as well as practical. So at Kite Insights, we have the head, heart, and hands model. And this is kind of like where we measure people's sustainability literacy against those three things. What do they know? What do they feel? And what can they actually do? And often you get very different levels of literacy at those 3 points. Typically, the head is quite well advanced. People often know more than you might think. But the heart is typically very conflicted, and the hands, the skills, are often quite low. That's the way it will often work. But we need this kind of mindset shift where people are thinking, feeling, and acting differently. And that's for every person in the organization.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that kind of aligns with, so last year's our ZC3 annual conference, we had a keynote from Professor Mike Berners-Lee, where he was kind of talking about this bottom-up and top-down approach, and kind of saying that, people give organizations permission to act, organizations give governments permission to act, and governments can influence one another. So really interesting stuff. And I suppose on that note, we will just say that ZC3 is coming up on the 26th of September this year. So if you did want to join that, then please do. But back to today with you, Joseph. So we have got a few questions in. I suppose I've been focusing more on the macro piece, and we have got a lot of questions from people here. They're really interested, I suppose, what they can actually do right now in their roles. So I suppose the first thing is we've got a comment from Jamie McKeown here, who says that does seem that distribution of the load is very much a team effort. As his role as sustainability manager, it's increasingly becoming to make it everyone's job. But focusing on those in that role right now, can you recommend, Martin, question from Martin Sleeth here, can you recommend any learning or training resources for sustainability literacy training for uh, quote normal employees? So he says he's already aware of the carbon literacy project, but looking for kind of wider sustainability recommendations from you.
Yeah, or this really depends on the level of literacy that you've got within the organization. And I guess like the first point here is to actually try and take a benchmark of where the business is at. And I can speak a little bit later if there's time as to a way that you can do that. Um, but obviously there are going to be function specific resources that you can provide. There are going to be general resources that you can provide. I mean, I mentioned earlier this distinction between kind of trainings that are about climate and trainings that are skill specific. So I think you really need to figure out, first of all, what it is that you're looking to do. So there are, many good trainings out there that are about climate. And when I say climate, I'm using that as a shorthand as well to maybe incorporate biodiversity, water, and any number of things in those kind of adjacent spaces. Carbon Literacy Project is a great one. Kite Insights has one called the Climate School. There are many out there. And that I think is a really good foundation for training. But arguably only a foundation. So the challenge right now is that there's a bit of a missing middle. So what happens is that you get those foundational trainings, of which there are a number of fine trainings. So that's kind of like one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got something like, the GRI qualification for sustainability reporting, or something that's really quite complex and technical. But there seems to be this kind of missing middle where people can take these stepping stones between the two. And that I think is really symptomatic of where we're at in the overall sustainability training space right now. And this is down largely to the fact that it is relatively early days still in this whole space. And one of the big shifts that I've had in the past few years is where I think we are on the exponential curve. So I strongly believe we're on this exponential curve of sustainability explosion and activities. But the longer I spend in this space, the earlier I believe we are on the exponential curve. So I think it's easy when you're in the sustainability space to think that more should be happening. So
Mm,
those foundational resources are limited for sure, but the vast majority of people are at a limited phase, so they're entirely appropriate. But I think then individual businesses need to start engaging a little bit more with that missing middle. Exactly what is it that you're trying to achieve? Where is the skills mix? And this is again something which is not fully in place at the moment, creating really robust kind of typologies and categorizations of what sustainability skills and competencies look like. Which of them are actually specific to sustainability and which of them lean into other transversal skills, such as data analysis, those types of things. So I think businesses need to really kind of audit where their gaps are, then go and have a look around and say, oh, okay, so well, actually what we need here is support for our procurement team to understand the fact that, further upstream in our supply and value chain, we've actually got really bad visibility on what's happening in the supply chain. And they go, okay, then you can start addressing the issue of, all right, so we're going to go and find some resources to help us develop that high upstream supply chain visibility. But you can't, and every challenge is probably going to have something that can be drawn upon, but they're not going to be like a sustainability course. It's not going to be called sustainability course. It's going to be more granular. So it's just, I think, really a case of trying to audit and map out where the needs are once you've gone beyond that basic about climate level.
mm,
And many businesses are not doing so great at that at the moment. I think they've been so bogged down with the foundational training, so bogged down with the requirements of sustainability reporting, which are only going to get bigger because, of course, we've been doing carbon. We're now going to be doing biodiversity. Very soon, we're going to be doing social impacts. It's going to be getting bigger and bigger. But businesses, I think, then need to, you know, figure out exactly where their biggest exposure to these issues are. For many people, it's supply chain, and then start figuring out how they can address those specifically as a priority.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've talked about the kind of the sustainability being spread across different departments, other people with other roles. You know, a lot of people will have an ESG title, and they've got to look at the social and the governance piece. You're talking about sustainability departments being bogged down with the reporting. So actually, how much time and resource do they have for? So, and then kind of going back to what you were saying a few moments ago about the curve here. So we've got a question to kind of tie this together from Elizabeth Evans, which says that many of the green jobs roles advertised are for kind of senior positions that have been created. And you stated that most people are relatively new to this. So how do the younger generations who could be considered to have or Elizabeth says, more of a vested interest in sustainability? I'd say perhaps some of the polling suggests they're more interested in doing more or seeing more. But how do we integrate into an industry with roles already requiring years of experience that most people lack?
Yeah, and that is really challenging and very true. Interesting with ecotopian careers, I was starting out with people in mid-career. That was kind of like my focus. But I very swiftly started getting Gen Z people coming to me and realized that actually everyone's kind of got the same problem. And I think it's because it's so new. The pathways are not properly articulated. You know, the pathways in universities for a moment are not great where they're teaching about climate and sustainability at all. Again, it's at that kind of meta level about climate and sustainability. What they're not doing is drawing the line between sustainability and actually skills that can be employed in the workplace. And I think this is something that the higher education system really needs to sort out real quick. Otherwise, we're never going to deliver on the people that we need. But so there's no easy answer, but the recommendation that I generally make for people who are both seeking to switch careers and also to get into their first jobs is to not worry so much about it again, about it being a sustainability job, but to get pretty much any job that you can. And even that's hard. I've got a lot of sympathy for young people. I've got young people in my life. It's so hard right now to get entry level jobs compared to the way it was 20 years ago. But again, this is where the every job is a climate job idea is really powerful. So whatever job that you can get into, the best strategy that people can employ in my mind is to reach out to the sustainability people within your organization, ask what they're doing, ask how are the connections being drawn to what you're doing and the department that I'm working in, and how can I help consolidate those connections. Now, for the most part, that's going to mean kind of probably volunteering extra time. And some people might feel that that's not fair, that they should be being paid for what they're doing. But I would argue that you will probably get more professional capital from volunteering in an activity like that, where you actually start engaging with the real world sustainability function of a business, than you would going and getting a qualification which was of an abstract nature. And essentially, you're doing it for free because you're probably going to be paying for a qualification as well. And then what happens if you do a decent job of that, you've actually then created 5, 10% of your non-sustainability job as having a sustainability function. And at that point, you've got a bullet point to stick on your CV about something that you actually did. Champion sustainability within my team to create greater synergy between the department and bigger organization, something like that. And then you've actually got real world experience. But I think you kind of need to muscle in on the space. You know, most sustainability people are stretched way too far. They don't have resources. They will probably be quite welcoming to somebody who wants to come along and contribute. And again, I would reiterate, I'm going to suggest that 80% of the people that you go and have that conversation with are going to be 1 to 3 years into sustainability themselves. They will know what it's like to make that transition into the space, and how learning on the job can be really useful. When I speak to people at sustainability conferences, I often ask them to tell their story about their way into sustainability. And again, the vast majority of the time, it's people who are doing something else. They were just personally interested in sustainability, and they just took the initiative. They stuck their hand up and said, I'll have a go at that. I don't know anything about it, but I'll have a go. And that there's momentum and there's kinetic energy in that type of willingness. And they build upon it in a surprisingly short period of time. So any young person who wants to get into the climate space, if you're struggling to actually get something which has got climate or sustainability in the job title, just try and leverage whatever it is that you're doing into that space. And I think you will make some progress, maybe not the progress that's of the scale that you want, but it will be something.
So you said earlier that 83% of people want to take action at work. But of course, you've also said, that these are people who have their own roles and they can't be taking on huge workloads. So how do we kind of balance that? And how do we, A, know how much action people want to take, and how many people will actually go to significant lengths and effort to take proactive steps? And kind of to couple that in with another question we've had here, what can sustainability teams or senior management exec, what can we do to empower employees to, what can we do to help our employees feel more empowered to help?
Absolutely. So I think, I mean, it's good to understand to begin with, I think the very diverse spectrum of what people perceive to be action on these issues. So you've got some people at one end of the spectrum, and their idea of action is not printing out emails or turning the light off when they leave the room. And then you've got other people at the other end of the spectrum, and they're going to go, man, I'm in this transnational organization. I need to reduce the carbon footprint, or be part of reducing the carbon footprint by 20% by 2035. And they've got a completely different, both quantitative and qualitative way of looking at it. And both of those ends of the spectrum are very valuable. So I think the trick, first of all, is to actually understand that this diversity exists, start trying to listen to employees about what it is that they want to do. And that can be an uncomfortable process for some businesses, because not all businesses are great at listening. And you might find out that sometimes those desires can be easily incorporated within the strategy. Fantastic. Sometimes you might need to manipulate to some degree what the strategy is in order to achieve those desires, or engage a good faith dialogue between what can be done and what people want to be done. And this, I think, is the great challenge for businesses right now, is that in the sustainability space, like the conversation splits in two. You get a lot of kind of NGOs and kind of organizations who come up with these like prescriptive frameworks. This is what businesses should be doing.
Mhm.
And they've got no particular experience in business reality. They just know that we need to reduce carbon by this much. We need to support biodiversity by that much. And that they are absolutely true. And I don't object to that at all. But then you have businesses who are saying, well, hold on a minute, this is the commercial environment in which we're working. That prescriptive statement is of no value to me. What I need are descriptive conversations about what people have actually done. And I would imagine, just thinking off the top of my head, that at Mobility Ways, one of the most useful things that you do with people is to share case studies about what other businesses have done to engage in their commuting activities to make them more sustainable. So businesses want these simple stepping stones, things that I can do right now that are commercially viable, and I want it on this timeline, that timeline, and then a bit further on, I can connect with that prescriptive statement that the NGO has made. But right now, there's a bit of a disconnect. So I think it's really important that both sides start trying to understand the nature of that disconnect and reaching out a little bit to bridge that gap.
Mm.
But the longer that I spend talking to businesses about their sustainability efforts, as somebody whose kind of mind is probably more in the NGO space historically, the longer I spend with businesses, the more sympathy I have with them at just how incredibly complex this is and how we need to do a much better job of supporting particularly small businesses. Because, large businesses have got more resources. They can do the reporting. When they do the reporting and disclosing, they get more business because they're looking sustainable from the outside. It's the smaller businesses that are really struggling to connect all of these dots and to operationalize their ambitions. So I think everyone just kind of needs to be a little bit more mindful of that and to start trying to close these gaps.
Well, you mentioned us there, Joseph, and that probably brings us quite nicely to what I was going to make my last question. If we've got time for another after this, we will of course move on to that. But we were talking about, what are small actions individuals can take within their role. So do I print that email? Do I, where's the recycling, for instance? So these are things that small actions that people can take um, in their everyday within their role every day. However, when we think about how and where each of us can make an impact, I mean, the biggest direct impact we can have on our organizational's indirect emissions is how we travel to work. And yet the emissions associated with commuting are still 5% of UK's total footprint. I mean, in some sectors, it can be as much as 40% of an organization's value chain emissions. So why do you think this is? And is there a disconnect? I mean, is there a knowledge gap? Do most staff not know how they travel to work impacts their organization footprint? Is it a training issue? They're not aware of how to do it, or is it a willingness? I mean, does the willingness to take action on climate start at the office door, or is there something else at play?
Yes to all of those things. There are a few others in the mix as well. I mean, first of all, there is a disconnect between people's personal lives and their professional lives. Um, People are probably slightly, it feels more intuitive for them to make changes in their personal lives than in their work lives, but that's starting to change. Part of it is just knowing what to do. Part of it, unsurprisingly, is I guess, the willingness that people have to do increasingly hard things. So if you look at people's approaches towards all of the climate solutions that you can make, things like, turning the light off when you leave the room, there is a very high willingness for people to do that. And the willingness gets less and less the more it costs people in terms of convenience and money and so forth. When you're getting down to things like, eating less meat or something, which really requires people to change their day-to-day habits, it's very low indeed. So I guess kind of commuting, and this is total speculation for me, in my mind, kind of commuting is in the middle of the pack somewhere. It's actually it is quite in terms of people's behavior. People are quite ingrained into the way that they do things, and to ask people to do things differently is probably it's not the really low hanging fruit, but nor is it that complex. The operationalization of it is relatively simple, right? It's just a case of kind of getting people into thinking in a slightly different way. And there are all sorts of remarkable kind of hacks that people don't tend to think about. I mean, in the context of travel, for example, I heard somebody from an organization talking about like tire pressure. And apparently, tire pressure, if it's suboptimal, has a profound difference on petrol usage. So it means if somebody went round their community with a tire gauge and made sure that everyone's tires were at the correct level of inflation, it would apparently have one of the most remarkable individual things that you could do to reduce overall emissions. It's such an easy little thing, but hardly anybody's ever heard of it. So I think, yeah, part of it's about, socializing more knowledge. Part of it's about engaging with those kind of deep behavioral patterns that we're bound into.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about tire pressure. I mean, there's loads of things we could focus on. Unfortunately, we're approaching the end, and we're not going to be able to do that today. But if anyone who is attending this webinar today is more interested in commuting more broadly within their organization, again, we've got ZC3 2004 coming up on the 26th of September. Starts at 9:30. There is a registration link in the chat, so please click through and register. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers from across government, academia, private and public sector organizations. So it's going to be a great event. If anything you've heard today from Joseph, if you would like to access the report produced by Kite Insights, that some of the facts that Joseph touched on were included in the slides. That report is titled "Every Job is a Climate Job," and there should be a link in the chat now where you can download that report. That just leaves me to say that I think we've reached the end. We've got about 1 minute left, so probably not time for any other questions. If you've got a question you've asked today and we haven't been able to ask it within the session, we have got a note of all of those, so we'll aim to put those to Joseph after, and I'm sure you'll be happy to give 1 or 2 lines that we can send over to the person who's posed that question. Thanks again, Joseph. Been a great session. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, all of you, for turning up and giving up an hour of your day to attend this webinar. Please keep an eye out on your email for other events we've got coming up, specifically ZC3 as well. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks very much. See you next time.